as we now know it.
Hmm.
But he also said that the Earth, there is evidence now, I mean, remember, he is a geologist, that the Earth itself, there is evidence that it's in the throes of geomagnetic inversion. In other words, the poles are actually shifting positions.
Mm.
The acceleration of the poles is going up every year, the movement of the poles, and the actual strength of the background field is lessening and has been doing for around 2,000 years, as far as they know.
Mm.
And the third thing, which they've actually modelled this in the laboratory, and those were two things that would happen just before a pole reversal. And the other thing was you get little outbursts of the opposite field in little bubbles, and there is actually one of those off the coast of South Africa.
Okay. Hmm.
So it looks as if, we're looking at an imminent geomagnetic reversal, and this is where the prophecies that came through from Danny and Brinkley tie in, because Danny and Brinkley was probably the most well-known of the near-death experiencers, and he was given a series of visions of the future, 300 visions there were, 117 of them were major world events, and by the time around 2000 or so, there was only 17 of those left to be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said about, that included Chernobyl explosion and the fall of the Berlin Wall among those 117. What he said about 2012 was that his prophecies basically went up from 1975 when he died while on the telephone and a lightning bolt hit the phone line.
Right, yes.
He was dead for 28 minutes, and he woke up with a sheet over him on the way to the morgue, the death certificate having been issued. But when he recovered, of course, he said these prophecies ended in a few that said between 2011 and 2012, the Earth changes would ramp up. The atmospheric and magnetic changes on the planet will start to increase.
Uh-huh.
And he said that in 2012 there would be an evolutionary opportunity for mankind that is caused by the solar system being in a position where it's where it's open to a new energetic. I can't remember the exact words now. A new energetic combination, something like that. But it sounds like he's describing exactly what Dimitri is talking about with the solar system going into a plasma cloud.
Right. Yeah, do you think that we have... the first of all, we can mention, of course, if we have such a thing as a polar reversal, I think that basically means that all human electronics will go bust, as far as I know. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Probably. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know if we had a electromagnetic pulse wave, that's the kind of thing that will happen. Vehicles with electronic boxes on them will probably fail. I mean, it's not a good time to be in an airplane.
Right.
And yes, possibly burn out computer hard drives, as far as I know.
Yes. One thing that we talked about here then is that the polar reversal might imply that electronics will fail. Another thing that comes to mind, of course, is that do you think that human beings will have to prepare in some way? Will this be a very spiritual shift, or will this be a very physical shift, meaning that we have to prepare for this in some way, and will we potentially again stand at the edge of our own extinction?
Okay. I'll just finish what I was saying about what Brinkley said.
Right.
Basically, that he also predicted between 2012 and 2014 a reversal of the poles. So that fits in with everything else as well.
Right.
But yes, regarding how we should prepare ourselves, I think we are looking at something which, this is something that another saying of McKenna, that if you look at this as a birth process, if an alien was to come around the corner and see a woman giving birth, he thinks she was in the throes of a very painful death with a metastasization of a huge tumour. But in fact, the reverse would be the truth. And there is some evidence that you can look at this as a birth process, because if you look at the Maya calendar systems, the Zolkin calendar, which is a 260-day calendar, it's said by the Maya, the ones that have been using it for thousands of years in the highlands of Guatemala, say this is based on human gestation. That's why it's 260 days. It doesn't seem to be obvious to the anthropologists what cycle this was. So they asked why 260 days, and they said that when a woman misses her period, there's 260 days before the baby's due.
Right.
So it happens to be a fact that if you set that out as a grid structure, and then you can use that same grid structure to map out the 13 Bacton cycle of the long count, and that's the one that started in 3114 BC and ends in 2012. And that also consists of 260 units, but this time each square is not a day, but a katun, a period of 7,200 days, just under 20 years. So something that Arguelles suggested in the Mind Factor, which was, I think, his best, most amazing contribution, is that if you noticed at the beginning of the 13 Bacton cycle, around 3114 BC, was the beginning of history. It's the first phases of civilization, the first dynasties of Egypt, the building of the megaliths, the first phases of Stonehenge. So you can use that as a sort of map of human history, and that implies that somehow 2012 is the end of human history, and that after that it's post-historic. And that the whole thing maps out a planetary gestation, like a mega map of the individual gestation of the Zolkin. So that, if this is you could look upon the whole thing as a sort of, this is when Peter Russell's ideas come into play as well, because he pointed out that there are 10 to the power of 10, that's 10,000 million molecules in a human neuron. Mm-hmm. And there are 10 to the power of 10 neurons in a human neocortex. And we're now above 10 to the 9, approaching 10 to the 10 humans on the planet. And so when you approach this magic number, it's a sort of critical mass factor. And so the individual units start to behave as parts of a larger organ or a larger being. So you could look upon this transition point that we're approaching as the point where we become living neurons in a global brain as of an awakening Earth.
Well, that's
also ties in, with what it seems to. All these things tie in various ways to various different prophecies. And,
yes.
The Peruvian people, the Queros, say that when we are functioning as we should, we act like a sort of conducting rod between the sky and the earth. And one of the exercises they do is to imagine themselves as a conducting rod with light going through their bodies. And that ties in the whole concept of Kundalini, which connects up Kundalini Shakti of the earth and Shiva from above.
So human beings potentially are an intermediary in some way. We're part of the planet. We're of the planet in that sense. And could it be also that the planet needs us then in that regard? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's been preparing us to perform our true evolutionary function as living human cells in a global brain. Where, I mean, we have the net, but I think it's probably designed for a telepathic link-up.
Right.
And that's exactly what Daniel Brinkley found when he came back from his NDE, as do many people who come back, that people who got within his aura, he thought they were speaking to him, but then he realised he was hearing their thoughts. It was actual audible telepathy going on. It took him some time to get to grips with it.
Sorry to interrupt there, but I find that very interesting because, again, his particular experience was that he had lightning coming through him, meaning he had an incredible electrical charge, basically activating him, if you will. And what we've been talking about here before that is that potentially we're having huge amounts of energy coming in, plasma or something like that. That would potentially mean then that this is about the activation of everyone with the help of this plasma, this energy, what have you, and that will potentially radically change the human being so much that we will potentially enable us potentially to have these types of properties, like, for instance, telepathy.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about Patrick Gerald. He's a kind of an apocalyptic writer, if you will. He written a book called How to Survive 2012, and also the Orion prophecy, and he talks very much about basically that the world, as I understand it at least, that the world will end in 2012. Now, you mentioned a little bit at the beginning that you have some other information that seems to not point in this direction. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. Patrick sent me. We were communicating before he published his first book. We were emailing each other, and he sent me some. I think he may have even sent me the entire manuscript for comments and things. And I did point out several points to him, some of which were just pure typos, some of them which I thought were more serious mistakes. But his story. Have you had him on the show here?
No, I haven't. No.
Well, his story was he read the Mayan Prophecies, the book by Adrian Gilbert and Maurice Cottrell, and he became convinced that the world was going to end in 2012, and he had some expensive life insurance policies that were all due to terminate shortly after 2012. So he got a bit, his plans for his retirement were completely ruined. And so he cashed in the policies and spent the money doing research about how to cope with 2012. And he got hold of a translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead by a Frenchman called Albert Schlossman. And it actually makes more sense than the standard Budge translation. If you read it, it actually reads as common as sensible sentences, unlike the one that most people use. But the interpretation was that the people who died in the Atlantis cataclysm had seen a sign in the sky shortly before that, so that they knew something was going to happen, and that the survivors of that cataclysm made their way to Egypt, and they sort of somehow managed to encode that information in Egypt for it to be passed on to the people who would be facing the repeat performance of this catastrophe that caused Atlantis. So he said that there was a sign in the sky, and it had something to do with Orion, and he was looking at the retrograde loops of Venus that occur every 8 years. When the Earth comes alongside Venus, it appears to do this loop in the sky. Mm-hmm. And so, it's every 584 days, actually. Every 8 years, if you join up the points on the horizon where the 5 loops have happened, it forms a perfect pentagram.
Indeed.
So it's not quite. It's about 2.4 degrees off. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the next loop then moves around slightly. This Schlossman said that this cataclysm in Atlantis occurred in 9792 BC, and that the sign of it was a retrograde loop of Venus occurring over the Orion constellation. And he looked at his astronomical software and found that, sure enough, in 2012 we have a retrograde loop of Venus occurring over the Orion constellation. So he thought this is the sign that this cataclysm is due for 2012.
Yeah.
And then he was convinced that if this information was still existing and waiting for us to discover it, it must be in a building that the Greek philosophers referred to as the Labyrinth, which is a huge astronomical building with thousands of rooms, and no one's ever dug it up or investigated it or really found it. And the idea was, how Robert Bauval discovered that the belt stars of Orion correspond to the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau. If you superimpose Orion over them, the belt stars fit exactly on the 3 Giza pyramids.
Yeah.
Well, Ratings and Gerald said that if you continue that process outwards, that happens that there's a constellation called the Labyrinth, and that if you then